This is kind of going to be like a natural extension of his talk, which in 8 months when the videos get released, you'll be able to go back and he kind of talks about using halogen components to like define behavior and not like rendering capabilities. Like this is pretty common in like the React community right now, like the renderless components. So this is kind of going to be like a natural like dual to his, where Thomas kind of talks about behavior, and this could be more like how do we just create components in general. So who writes pure script professionally? All right, these guys. Anyone else? One? Some? Okay. Who's like got halogen in production? Well, these guys. All right. Okay, not yet. All right. Well, I hope that this kind of helps. We can go, right? Are we good? We're good? All right, I'm going to just go. Now that I wasn't going before. I'm Forrest. Work for a company called CitizenNet. CitizenNet out of Los Angeles. We have had halogen and PureScript in production now 9 months or so. Roughly like 30,000 lines at this point. And this talk is like, we have a open source library of components that we've developed that just weren't there when we started. And it's not a library that you would just pull into your app. Like this is like components that we use in our application. They are according to like our designer. We're not like going to make them generically like, bootstrappy and like provide themes. We're never going to do that. But we did develop like in the open source the same way that Slam Data did, helped us get started. We're hoping that this library kind of does the same for you. And I'm kind of like going to walk through like how we got there, and we'll see how it goes. I don't know. 2 days ago I wasn't giving this talk, so take it a little easy on me. So yeah, we got the okay, and it was awesome. Like, I don't know how we did it. People still ask like, how'd you get PureScript in production? I'm like, I still don't really know. Like, we got a forward-thinking manager, and like things fell into place, and JavaScript's just bad enough that it was kind of a perfect storm of halogen being mature enough, and there being enough examples, and the PureScript community being great in Slack, and the Slam Data application actually being open source at that time. Just kind of like created a perfect storm. So we were evaluating other things, and PureScript is what we decided on. We had we had started to actually like implement. We had like done some stuff of like, let's create some kind of demos, and this works, and it's like, all right, go do it. About a month into it, it was like, I don't know, man. Should we be doing this? Did we make the right? Like for me, this is like internally, like what is going on? It's like this doesn't feel right. So like, what happened? I don't know. And this is probably what happened. But I think it was more of this, right? Like in all things, we come with expectations about the way things work, whether it's like you come from a strong object-oriented background, right? Coming into Haskell, kind of it's hard, right? And it wasn't like the object-oriented part that really was the baggage. It was this. Anybody know where this is from? This is the Thinking in React tutorial. And for the last 2 years, we've been you grab this mock and you create 8 components, and this is the way you do things, and this is the way we did things in Angular, and this is the way you do things in React, right? This is the kind of the search bar from that, and not a lot going on. This is kind of, I don't know if they still call this that, but damn, Abernov was calling these like dumb components at one time. They don't do anything. So what we did, we started out, let me see if I can zoom in on like the relevant parts here. I don't expect you to be able to see all this nor like care, but this is like the same component implemented in Halogen. It's clearly longer, right? And in our eval here, for those that like don't have Halogen yet in production or have played with it too much, in the same way they were calling their like handlers on click, we've got this eval thing, and we're doing kind of the same thing. We just raise, right? Like we just say like when a user inputs raise up to the parent component, and my component takes this type of state and just render out state, right, on this on my receiver. Like I don't care, like raise, and then just render out what I've got. This is kind of very, very common thing to do in React, right? And so they take that same search bar component and they mount it in a component, and they take the state and they stick it into the component. And when you do that in Halogen, it looks worse. Like this is the same component mounting the search bar component that we had written, and we don't have to like dig through all of this. Like the particularly sucky parts here is the child query and child slot business, right? Where we have to now, like, the type has to reflect that the search bar component that we just wrote is like, it's in the type now. So we got to carry, like all of this stuff changes. We've got a parent component, we've got slots, we've got, and let me see if I can zoom down here. And we're mounting this, and it just looks ugly, and it's hard, and it's like there's a lot of machinery going on. This is how we started writing our components. It was like yes.
Is this both components in one page, or is this just the parent component?
This is just the parent component. The other one that we were looking at before was the search bar component. This is the search bar. This is the parent component mounting the search bar, right? So you got a lot. There's a lot. Like, this kind of sucks. This is just me after like a month. It's like this is horrible. Why are we doing this to ourselves? And it became like apparent that Halogen components are not React components. If you use them in the same way, it's gonna be horrible. You're gonna hate your life. Don't do it. Oh. No, go back. All right, question. How many Halogen components?
Yeah. That's what I would do. One component.
One star. Ideally 0, because this is embedded into some larger component that, like, you're not going to probably reuse this. It probably exists in some other component. But if this is what you had, you have 1. And so this is like a different shift, right? Like, you don't come in to a mock and say, hey, I need those 10 components. You come and say, I have 1 Halogen component. So this is the same example of like taking. This is the same example of that mock implemented as 1 Halogen component, with the distinction now that, or the difference being that our search bar is just now a function. Yeah?
Did you go for 1 component just because it's such a pain to glue components together?
Yes.
So it's because of mechanics of
It's both. It's both. It's ergonomics of like it's tough to carry, like to do the slot, to do the like all of the slot machinery to carry it around in the types, and unnecessary, right? As we'll see. So we've taken that search bar component that was like, I don't know, 70 lines, and we've just made a pure function out of it of basically state to HTML. The type is P of I, but basically like your query type. And it's this search bar that's important, and we're going to look at like this function of kind of refine this idea of like getting away from halogen components and just dealing with functions, right? Those functions, though. So to your point, like reach for a halogen component when you have a lot of state. Like if you go back and you look at all of our type aheads and stuff, that's a lot of state that you don't want to carry around, right? Like in the same way that halogen isn't React, it's not Elm. You don't want to carry all of that on the like one global state tree. But you got to have like legitimate need for private state, right? It's got to be like something to justify the halogen component.
Is private state mean that it doesn't go all the way out to tree?
Yeah, it's in halogen we actually have like these localized state, right? Like a type ahead. The state of whether that type ahead is open or not is not in the, like the parent doesn't know that except for kind of querying or however we expose the state to them.
So, for example, to use examples from the HTML components, like the div tag, this is a stateless component, right?
Yep.
So you would not write this in halogen, or you would not make a specific halogen component for this?
For a div?
Or, yeah, a div.
We'll come back to that. It's a good
Okay.
question. Yeah.
But like for an example of a stateful component would be like a checkbox.
Right, correct. No, not even checkbox. When a halogen component, at least the way that we think about them is like a big piece of functionality, right? Like I'm going to like the users page, right? Is a form, is or a type ahead, right? Or something that has a very clear local state that doesn't belong like in the global state. So to some like that's kind of how we use it, is like, yeah.
Essentially like internal state that can just be black box.
Yeah, right. Like, but we've been doing this for a long time, right? Like, I mean, the React community has kind of challenged us, but our notions of components going back 20 years is kind of this idea of localized state for a component is not new. Right?
So by state, you mean something in like some piece of data in a JavaScript closure? Like if it's state that's stored on some DOM element, you would like, you still call this state? Because I asked because you said a checkbox, like you consider that not a stateful component.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the checkbox itself is basically probably just reading some state that says, am I checked or not, right? The fact that it's checked or not is really being driven by like a form, right? The model on the form, or some other piece of state. But the checkbox itself is just a pure function that's taken in whether it's checked or not, right? So I wouldn't design like a checkbox as a halogen component. I would just say it's a pure function that takes in whether it's checked or not. And we'll take a look at that.
Okay.
What's up?
What's the difference between like reading state and adding state?
Maybe that's the confusion here. A lot of like for this button. Let's go back to the checkbox example. When you design that, it can. I don't even know how to like quite articulate that. That's a very good. It is a function that can take some value and render accordingly, right? Like we're not storing the state of that checkbox in the checkbox. The checkbox is actually reading from some state and displaying itself accordingly, right? Same thing with like input fields, right? Like the input has some state in the DOM, but what is actually rendered in the text is probably off your model or whatever. Like you get a user from the database, you pull the name and you say like checkbox or input, render this, right? So the state is actually what is halogen state. It's different. Does that make it clear? I don't know if that's any more clear.
It seems like the differences between like a button that is a halogen component that has its own state, like registers a click, and that goes through the query algebra, and toggles the checkbox, and now re-renders itself. And then saying like, well, I could accomplish the same thing by having more of that state on the parent, or more of that state on like the form, which has a bunch of checkboxes, and just say each one of these checkboxes has a boolean, and it just takes that boolean, checks
Right.
it out, checks. Avoiding the need to have components for every single one. Does that seem right?
That seems right. That seems fair.
So it's about kind of like where you want to keep this.
Where you want to keep the state?
Where you want to keep it.
We could totally write a checkbox halogen component.
Yeah.
You would hate your life.
You would, absolutely.
So part of like we got this design system from our designers, like go build this, and we want to use all of these components across the app. We want basically the same thing that everybody in UI wants, some uniform set of library that we're all using the same components, and we kind of started off doing these as halogen components, and it is miserable. Like so. We're going to kind of take this notion of a button, and we're going to kind of refine it to where it is now. So the first thing we did was like, this is pretty common, right? Like again, more baggage. I'm going to take my function here is going to take some config, and I'm going to say like, my button could be a primary button. I've got a type up here. My button could be primary, secondary, or transparent. It's got all of these things, these options, and I'm gonna export this to you. Like this is how you're gonna consume my component, is you're gonna say button, and you're gonna give me this config record. This seems like pretty standard practice, right? Like you go out to a React library, they're all kind of configured in this way, right? And this is a pretty standard thing. And so down here, I just have this container component that is calling my pure function, and down here at the bottom, and giving it the record of what I want to render. And this is kind of like the relevant part there, right? So we are now on the halogen DSL, where we're using functions instead of components. It sucks. Like this sucks. And like this sucks because you got to basically you have to create this record anytime that you want to use this button, right? Like you can't. React Simple might be doing a little bit, like does some type trickery to set defaults to allow you to like create smaller config records to pass, but like we weren't. And so anytime that you want to use this button, you've got to create this record. And so like your next step is like, all right, and where my button is defined, I'm gonna define some set of defaults. I'm gonna default record this, right? And then when I call my button, I'm gonna just give it the defaults extended with what I actually care about. And I've created the record, and the only thing I actually like is meaningfully different is my click handler and my label, right? So smaller, still sucks. And it isn't very good for I think a couple reasons, right? It's like extension, the like fact that inevitably your designer is going to come and say, can you use that button but like just slightly different, like maybe on like a drop down and not quite that blue or whatever, and I don't really want the label and I want an icon, but 2 icons, and I don't want it on the right, I want it on the left, right? Inevitably, like this always happens. When you start to nest these things, like you now have to you have to expose the lower level config, right? Like anytime that you want to wrap this button, you now have to. It pollutes the config record all the way up, right? That sucks. And it feels weird. Like we're in the Halogen DSL, and you're typing these big records, right? Which is where it just doesn't look right. And typically, like that to me says like something's weird. Like I'm not doing the right thing. So if we look at like the type signature of these buttons, like I don't know if this is what you were actually getting at, right? If we look at like the type of button, this is the actual signature from Halogen. So it takes an array of iprops of this HTML button's a big ass row. Oh. I was trying to get through the entire talk without saying curse word, and I didn't do it.
He's never done it.
10 minutes. That was the longest I've gone in a long time. Some array of HTML, and it's going to give you back an HTML element, right? What if, you got a question?
You said the HTML button is a row.
A row of, yeah, so this
Like what would be in it?
this button defines all of, Halogen defines a bunch of behaviors for you, right? Like in this row is disabled, is on click, is on, on focus, eventing, classes, all of the behavior that you would, typically associate with a particular DOM node is reflective in these big rows. Basically all your valid properties are defined.
So you call this like an HTML element, not a component, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a function, right? This is just an element. This is just a function that given some properties and some children nodes, returns me back a DOM node. Well, it doesn't return me a DOM node, but it returns me like this button.
Okay, that makes sense.
This is just Halogen, right?
This is Halogen.
This is when you use the Halogen.
Yes. This is very Halogen specific. This is how you create a button in Halogen. So what if instead of our config record, we expose the same array of properties and the same array of children, and we return a button? Our config got a lot smaller, right? Like all of the things that we wanted to config up, like text and icons, is now like up to the user to render. They could render whatever they want in this button. We don't care. It's kind of, in some ways, like the render pattern, right? Like when I create a component, I want to like just the consumer of this component can render whatever they want in here. We have all of the things like on click, whatever, are now being the full set of what was available to you is now available to you, right, where it wasn't before. And we are still stuck with these.
Sorry, what do you mean by the full set?
This full set of like, before the only way you could interact with the button was what I exposed to you via the config. You couldn't say on focus, on this. If you needed that functionality, I need to update my config. But now anything that you can do with a button, you can do with this function, right?
So you just wrap it.
We're wrapping it. wrapping it. We're adding some defaults. We're basically, we're saying the props that you gave me, I'm just going to concat on some classes.
Yeah, so it's not quite wrapping, right?
It's-
Or you're just like appending.
I'm appending some classes here. I mean, I'm constructing a button with some very specific classes based on the config I have left, what type, and whether it's elevated, right? Whether it's got some.
You're overthinking it. It's just a function.
Right.
Pass stuff in.
You said that.
Dependency checking, all it is parameter passing.
So this is a lot better. Like we're now, we can go. Anybody have any like questions specifically about this? Right? Like, is this clear? We've just kind of, we're basically using the existing function that Halogen has provided. No? So this is kind of how we call it. It's getting better. We still have a little bit of config, but I can now render this just like I would any other Halogen function. It's getting better. We're getting there. Let's refine again. This is the approach that we've kind of taken, is that like that type we had, where you had like primary, secondary, or transparent, decided to just break those out into functions, right? Like a primary button, secondary button, transparent button. These categorizations, right? They're typically not a lot of them. In this case, like button, right? And so you could kind of break them out into 3 functions and have your primary button specific classes there, and not try to over config a part like a single function. And this pattern's kind of worked out really well for us. After most things, elements, we don't have any config left. And I left this config in here specifically, but after this, as we've kind of broken them out into like your type, we're typically left with just the standard like array of iprops to array of HTML to function, right? Or to HTML. And so this is one approach that we've taken, is just kind of these bigger buckets of categorization, just kind of break them out into separate functions. That may be acceptable to some people, maybe not to others. It's worked out well for us. And so instead of calling my button passing in type, I am just calling primary button. But I've still got this elevate, and it sucks. Like, I want to get rid of these like configs as much as I can. And here's something new that we're exploring, so bear with. We're almost there. This is going to take a little bit of explaining. We can get rid of those rest of our like config, like elevate, or some of these other like config options that determine like display, by creating a custom HTML like Halogen specific property. And so I do that on line 19. Yeah. So on line 19, I'm defining a custom Halogen prop of type elevate. And so I can, in my HTML, or in the Halogen, and in the Halogen DSL, I can say something like, button dot elevate, and give it a Boolean. The way that we can do that is we can take I've created a new row up here of elevate, which is a Boolean, and I take our HTML button, which is the row for a button and extend it with my elevate row. So I have a new row of HTML primary button, which is all of the properties of button with this elevate functionality. And when you call this function, will pull the elevate property out of the props, do some stuff, and pass the rest of the props and to button as if they weren't there, right? So this allows you to.
But the prop that doesn't get passed through to halogen, basically.
It's a prop that does not get passed through to the button, because if you try to do this button, the compiler is going to be like, these types don't align. You're trying to give me like, these rows don't match up. Elevate is not in HTML button or HTML button. So I purposely didn't pull this pull evaluate iProps. I didn't put it in the slide because there's some stuff going on there, some coercion, some unsafe course to make this work. But it's type safe as long as it's monomorphic, right? Like we were talking about this last night. Like we don't know if you could actually do this in like a generic helper function because the compiler, I think, will blow up. But you can define a function for the remainder of these config options and provide it some default and say like, okay, if no elevate was passed, it's just going to be false in the same way that like any other component would do it. And so now, before I move on, like,
I'm stepping through this a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
so before the primary button took some button props, and then an array of iProps for an HTML button, and then an array of, and then like a tree of further HTML.
Yep.
And you got a button out of it. And now you've got no config, but you're passing in this like new prop that you created, elevate.
Yep. The only
The new prop is the old is the full prop list plus one extra prop, right?
Plus
Yes.
one extra one, elevate, which then you pull into that tuple with.
Yep, I pull a tuple out. So evaluate in this case is going to be, you don't see the implementation here, but it's a Boolean, right? Whether you passed it or not.
Okay, so then
And
you value.
the rest of the iProps prime is the rest of the iProps that you would have passed in. And so we give iProps to the button, iProps prime to the button. That's the original set of props that were originally defined for button. And now we've got
The halogen iProps.
the halogen iProps.
It's now compatible.
This is now compatible with button. Correct.
But you can, okay, and then in elevate classes, you use that Boolean that you pulled out.
Correct. Just basically say like, this should get now box shadow or whatever.
So pool evaluate, should that just be pool elevate?
Did I pull evaluate?
Yeah.
No, it's actually probably, no, this compiles, so it's actually called pull evaluate. Yeah. It should be pull elevate. And if you guys are like interested, like, and feel like you guys can look at this function, we'll take a look at it for those that are interested. But this is awesome because now this is how I could do it, right? Like I could go back to the world of like living exclusively in the halogen DSL. I have pure functions. I can optionally pass this elevate prop or not. I don't have to have some config record hanging around with defaults. This is kind of the world I wanted to live in when I started, but it took a long time to get there. Right? So this refinement that we've been doing on these pure functions over and over and over again kind of gets us in this world where we can have all of the config that we needed. I can render whatever I want in these buttons. I have complete flexibility to render a like emoji of a horse and whatever in there and with whatever the designer wants. And we could use this function anywhere.
Yeah, so we're using the record builder stuff underneath one of those things.
Do you want to take a look at the function? All right, YOLO, right? Oh. No, we're not doing that. It's worse.
No, disclaimer, we just copied what Nate was doing in the variant library.
So
If he can get away with it, we can.
But I believe that record builder library has stuff like add this symbol value there. Record.
Yeah, it's not really a record
Yeah,
though.
it's just a row.
So it is actually pull evaluate. We were doing this last night, again, like 2 days, and we were like half a bottle into some scotch last night when I finished this each. It was fun. So we're folding over our iProps, right? And here's the default value of like false that I wanted to like, if evaluate isn't present, it's false. In a lot of these like config stuff, it really does make sense. Like most of the time, they have a default like standard thing, right? Like elevate should be false or whatever button thing. It typically has like some default value, right? Like it has a default class name or whatever it is. So we're folding over these props.
Can you go over like what is an array of iProps?
Yeah. So the array of iProps is a array of this like prop, this HHI.iProp, which is a, you guys want to look at the type for this? You guys want to actually go into some pursuit?
That's a course thing. Sorry, I'm looking at the course expand of the course on it. That's basically doing tricky JavaScript thing.
This is how like what Nate's doing in the variant library. But we can guarantee, like, as long as this is not polymorphic, we can guarantee that this is actually this works.
That's why I think it'll be helpful to actually look at
At, like-
types of iProps.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, you looked at this before.
So we got our iProp. Nope. This one right here. Yep. So iProp wraps this prop constructor. So we look at prop in pursuit so good. And it's in the VDOM prop. So prop has a few things. What we're particularly interested in is this property constructor. And it is the string, which is the value that was like the value of the prop, right? Like the string.
The name of the property.
Yeah. So like in this case, elevate would be the string here, and prop value. Prop value is just a type, like this data type, and all under the hood of these, when you are like prop from Boolean is just an unsafe course, right? And so when I get when I'm pulling out that prop value,
Because it's already given its type. So
Right.
because it's a generic type.
it's a generic type. I'm like, I know because I pulled this out that this is a Boolean, but it's a prop value, right? It's like you're a Boolean, but the compiler has no way to go from like prop value to Boolean. So it's like you are a Boolean. So we're doing that for the Boolean, and then we could do this for the row. This is how I don't know if you guys went to one of the talks where it was basically the two dudes kind of interacting, and they showed like consumption of the row, like as it comes in. This is basically we have to consume that. We have to consume elevate off this row, so that way we could pass it into button. So those so the types line up, right? So we're basically pulling elevate out of this row and feeding it back into button. It's a little gnarly.
Could you run through that for a moment again from like the component itself all the way down?
Sure.
Like because the whole point here is to have the type safety, right? To know that,
Yep.
that you're adding the elevate and it's of the right type,
Yep.
and have the compiler complain and not see the fucked up render
Yep.
whenever that happens.
So I say up here, I've got a type row, right? I'm gonna extend it. So now I've got all of it, HTML button extended with my elevate row. The first argument here is gonna be my array of iprops, right? So I'm gonna fold over that. And I'm gonna pattern match it. I'm gonna say, if it's a prop,
Where's the button itself again?
which button?
The rendering itself. Sorry, the syntax is like half alien to me. So.
Yeah. So
So here's the button that gets the icons, right?
right. So
At this point, you don't know what the iprops are.
at this point, when I don't know what they could be.
Well,
They could,
you know what
I know the type is. I know they possibly can be. I don't know like.
Right, from line 33, we say they have to be of the type HTML primary button, which defined further up is the same as the HTML button that comes with Paladin, except for we added an additional row, which was
Yep.
the elevate. So essentially you're saying these props can be all the same props that apply to HTML button, as well as this new one that we added called elevate. Right?
But I want to pull those off. I want to say like, button cannot compile with that row.
Yeah, in fact, you have to. If you don't hold on, you can't make a button.
You can't. It won't. This won't compile. So we're folding over our set of iprops. So he's like, okay, if I almost said it. I almost dropped the F-bomb right now. Guys are. So we're pattern matching on this elevate string, which is right. It's this guy, right? We're pattern match on this constructor. This is the one we care about. And our string here is going to be elevate, and x is going to be a prop value. We know that it's a Boolean, but only way we can get the Boolean out of there is to tell the compiler, like, it's a Boolean. Like, trust me, bro, this is a Boolean. And so we're L mapping this course, we're basically just saying unsafe course on this particular prop value.
On various parts of the code, you called it evaluate, elevate, and expand it.
It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. Whatever. I was like, I'm telling you, this was the last slide last night at midnight into some, it's fine.
To clarify a little bit, like the LMAP, where does that come from?
That's a bifunctor. Yeah, so we're because tuple is an instance of bifunctor, right? So I can LMAP over the in this case my default value is false. So my LMAP here is going to replace it with whatever is there. Otherwise, it's going to be false. My RMAP, the right side of the tuple, or it could have just been mad. I'm just saying whatever else it was, just cons it on and draw, and that's going to be the existing part of the row.
So we're building up a new array of iprops, and we're adding every single item except for expanded back into it. So that's
But-
how we know that or elevate is right. That's how we know elevate is not in this new array.
It's pretty tricky. This is like, this is the. I'm sure that there's a better way to do this. In fact, like we have just started to look at the last bit of our config doing it this way. The problem is that we can't, at least in our discussions, I don't think that you could do this in a polymorphic way. I think you need to define this for every property for this to be type safe. Like you need to say like, for elevate, do this thing, because otherwise this unsafe core stuff is like gonna blow up and it's no longer safe. And so it's as safe as long as we can we're doing it monomorphically and say like.
It's like in here we know that if the property is elevate, the prop value is always going to be Boolean, so we can safely coerce that. But if you were to parameterize this function, you could fuck that up, and the compiler wouldn't know.
I didn't do it. I did not say the F word. Just so you know. Just so you know. It wasn't me. It wasn't me.
You set the precedent.
Any question like this is like
How would you compare this to like like taking the analogous React world, how would you compare it to prop types or libraries like semantic UI, or that like come to solve this problem, that give us, I want to say, compile time guarantees in JavaScript about our styling compared to, because the largest game, like I'm thinking about the whole conversion from JavaScript to pure script.
Right.
That's like a big leap to do.
Right.
And I'm trying to understand the added value, because I see here all the additional fluff that's coming in, all the
Yeah.
additional piping, which is worth it if I get the type safety.
Yeah.
Over here we're like, but I
This-
do get that type safety when I use prop type, when I use styling libraries that have that baked in.
You think you do.
Yeah.
And I like the dirty secret and like in PureScript, right, is that like you get the type safety, but when you go look at some of these core libraries, there's a lot of this unsafe course, right? Because it's like we know that it can only be, in this case, Boolean. It's not unsafe. Unsafe course in this case is like a, you know, it's not unsafe. It's just.
I can't explain any of the types.
Yeah, it's just like I just need to tell the compiler, right? Like it can only be this value, so it's not unsafe.
So you'd say this is analogous in some way to prop types, because that's what I do with prop types. I tell React, hey, this property I'm passing, you have no idea what it's supposed to be. This has to be a function. This has to be a nested object of this schema. And if it isn't that, then at runtime, of course, it won't say anything. This will not work. But like build or test time, I will get that error.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is basically defining a custom property like in your React component and says like it must be of type Boolean. And
But in this case, the compiler will actually guarantee that, because we've defined the row such that if the elevate key is in there, it will have type Boolean. So if you ever try and construct this property with anything other than Boolean, the compiler will blow up.
Yeah.
And so like the unsafe coerce here, because of the way that we constrained it to say that we're only going to look for this property elevate, there's no way that can ever be anything other than a Boolean. And if you ever did try and make it anything other than a Boolean, the compiler wouldn't catch that.
Yeah, I actually don't care about the unsafe coerce. That seems like natural because that's part of the language piping.
yeah,
But so it's more or less we're giving the same mechanism that prop types gives.
yeah, and what this really buys us, right? Because we could have put this in the config option, and yeah, I mean, like if you're fine like passing around the record, and being forced to like feed in whether this is a true or a false, what this particular mechanism will do is allow you to optionally provide it, and to say like you're going to optionally provide this in your array of props. If you do, it always has to be a Boolean. You can drop it off. You drop it off, I'm going to set it to false.
And something else that Forrest said to me last night is that this is kind of like the last thing to reach for.
Yeah.
After the other things that have been done, like in the talk so far, that after you've already like pulled things into the function, and you've already had the defaults, and you've got like 2 config options left. Like most of it has already been addressed with other patterns. Then you've got like your last 2, like when you just elevate. Then you're like, okay, either I can somebody's make config, or maybe I'll make a custom pattern.
Right, because you could.
If you can address it with one of the other patterns,
You know, and this like, you know, I left elevate in here because I think it's a good example. It's like we've already pulled out like a primary button, a secondary button, and a transparent button. You wouldn't want like a primary elevated button, a transparent elevated, or that wouldn't make sense. But right. No, but you could do it this way, so that way you don't have like this proliferation of functions that you've pulled out, right? So you don't have to have some function that you've defined of, you know, primary elevated versus primary, right? The distinction can be made this way, and it's a little bit cleaner than having to add, you know, breaking them out into functions or carrying the config record. I would reach for this last. Like after I've done the other things, like Thomas said, this is like, at least in our experience, this is like the last 1 or 2 properties for a function. And it's really for like developer ergonomics. Is I don't want to be seeing all those config records everywhere, and I like my Halogen DSL to be, you know, succinct and look good.
Right, most of our, well, we don't call it components, we call it
Blocks. Is what I want.
But yeah, most of these, we'd never have to get to this point because we can boil down. We can pretty much eliminate the config without adding these.
Right, like yeah, in the case of like a checkbox, right? Like we don't really have a big config on a checkbox. We just we add our styles to the checkbox, and and then just kind of expose the checkbox iProps, and in this case it's a leaf node. There's no children, so you're free to just use it that way. And so this is, I think, more of a rarity, right? So this is a lot nicer to me. I don't know, but again, like getting there is a little bit of a we call them blocks, and our PureScript Ocelot library is built on these things. They provide a way for us to basically, like a halogen implemented component library that is built on pure functions. And it took us a while to get there, to kind of coming from other languages, or not other languages, but like basically bringing a React mindset and trying to follow the patterns that React and Angular, whatever it is, really took a while. It took a while to get there. Define your functions or your components as pure functions. Prefer configureless functions when you can, and that's by kind of just exposing the array of iprop and HTML, the array of HTML, and start by breaking them out into separate functions if you can, and then as a last resort, these custom iprops. But what is nice, this is kind of at the bottom, I just wanted to like mention this, is what when you actually get into, when you have your signature is array of iprop to array of HTML to HTML, you're free to implement the other like more halogen idiomatic like underscore after to indicate like this doesn't take iprops. So there are a lot of times that like we use this like div underscore. I don't care about the iprops. Now you can do that with your own functions. This is our library. You're probably not going to pull it into your project per se. The type ahead, though, you could have the type ahead. You could have the type ahead if you want, but it's more of a reference. And we hope that you guys can find value in some of the stuff that we're doing, build up your own components yourselves, and yay.
So I have one more.
Don't.